Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Officer Training School. My name is Joshua Joushi Howard, and today we're going to be talking about the humble Chimera, the workhorse transport of the Astra Militarum. This video is going to be a little bit different than some of the other officer training schools because most of the things that you can do that are interesting with chimeras are about the concepts and how you actually play them, and some cool tips and tricks that some players might not know about when they're actually going to be playing the chimeras. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and talk about some of the shielding I got to do. So firstly, if you're interested in all of the information that I talk about, I will oftentimes refer to, you see this super often in competitive lists. This is where you can find that information for yourself. I have a spreadsheet on my Ko-fi page. A link will be down in the description if you're interested in that. I try and do updates there. I've been, better and worse at different times about it, but that's where you can find all this information. Also, we are into our second month of having access to membership. Some of you guys have already been members for more than a month, so thank you so much to everybody who is there. If you are interested in joining the Discord, make sure you go towards your Discord and there's a gear icon, and click there, open up the Connections tab, and you should be able to instantly find access to the Discord. You'll get to be able to see a lot of information before it comes out, and also I'll talk to the members in particular to try and get some of the ideas of what kind of videos you guys would like to see. As a quick trial, let me know if this is something you're interested in. I'm going to be talking about some of my upcoming events as well. I've had the pleasure of running into a couple of you in the SoCal area in the last couple of months, so a couple of events that I am registered for. I will be at There's Only War in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm going to the SoCal Open Teams event in San Diego, California. I'm also going to the California Cup in San Diego, California. Another event that I'm really looking at going to is the Battle Shocked GT in San Francisco, California, and if it goes to 25 entrants, I'll go. I'm trying to pump up my ELO, and it only counts events that have at least 25 players, so if you are interested in going to that, if you are interested in saying hello, this is a great way to meet me. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the meat of what we're actually going to be talking about today. We'll talk about the basics of chimeras, how you generally want to equip them, what you want to put inside, the orders and stratagems, but most of this video is going to be focused on that last section, strategy and tips and tricks. There are a lot of little things that you want to be trying to think about with the chimera, and not a lot of them actually have to do with the chimera itself. It has to do quite a bit with just the raw data sheet and the rules that accompany it being a transport. So the basics of the chimera are this transport is cheap and it's annoying, and you can have a lot of them, and that is a really big plus because you can have as many as 6 chimeras in a single list, and they actually take real firepower to get rid of. It is really annoying for an opponent to suddenly see, oh my gosh, that is 9 chimeras. I can kill 2 or 3 of them pretty easily, but that still means they're going to have 2 or 3 of them left after you're done shooting. They have a lot of plinky shots. They have a lot of lasgun shots. They have a lot of bolter shots. They have some flamer shots, and none of them by themselves are particularly impressive, but when you tell your opponent, hey, I'm going to be throwing 18 shots at you with lethal hits, they're going to be taking a couple of saves. They are really good workhorses in general. They kind of do a little bit of everything. They're not super great at anything in particular, but the fact that they can do almost anything you want and do it okay makes them a really valuable unit because of how cheap they are. The way you generally equip them, you can go with 2 heavy bolters or 2 heavy flamers, and there's not really another option here. They're both okay. The heavy flamer makes you a cheap, like, budget Hellhound, which is not bad. It's a decent Overwatch. The 2 heavy bolters means that you can shoot from farther away, or if you're going to be needing to screen out part of the board, or you want them to be part of the second wave of chimeras, then they can still participate in the battle a little bit better with heavy bolters. So they're both fine. Ultimately, it's unlikely that picking one or the other is going to change the outcome of any game, so if you have one that you think looks cooler, do that one. Of course, take it with the free heavy stubber and the free hunter-killer missile, of course. Okay. So let's talk about the different things that you see good players putting inside of their chimeras, because remember, when you bring a dedicated transport, if it has nothing inside of it at the beginning of the game, it dies. So you need to put something inside of it, otherwise you're just pitching 70 points to the wind. Luckily, the payloads are fairly diverse, so let's go ahead and talk about them at the very beginning. The most common one you tend to see people put inside chimeras is Catachan. And the biggest pros of this are, 1, it is very cheap. At currently 55 points for Catachan and 70 points for the Chimera, that's 125 points. You can very conceivably have an army that includes 6 Catachan Chimeras. It gives it Scout 6, it gives you a couple more extra plinky shots with the flamers that the Catachan have, and it has a lot of OC. 20 OC for 55 points is really good. It does almost nothing else, but that's pretty cool. The downside of this is that it is mostly just OC. You don't do a whole lot else with it because the Catachan do so little damage, they will die to almost any melee unit. So you can use them as like nuisance charges and ways to deny primary, which is one of the strongest ways to play it. However, that's mostly all it does. So what you generally see with Catachan Chimeras is they really gum up the middle of the board, they deny your opponents large areas that they can move to, and they can deny primary because it has the most OC, like we said. Another very common one that you see is Kazarkin. This was very popular in Leviathan, but is less popular now in Pride Nexus, but you still see it from time to time. It still has the Scout 6 inches, and one of the main reasons you bring Kazarkin is because of how quickly they move and how effective the Melt-a-Mind rule really is. Between Melt-a-Mind and grenades, you're going to be doing an average of 7 mortal wounds to a vehicle. More on that is going to be in the Kazarkin video. One of the biggest downsides, though, is you cannot use the Warrior Elite rule while you are embarked. This means that the Kazarkin only ever get access to the move, move, move order effectively when they disembark. It's also the most expensive of the things that you can reasonably put into a Chimera. The main way that you use this is the Chimera is playing secondary to the Kazarkin. You want to get the Kazarkin to move very far early on in the game, and the Chimera will just go and do other things after that. So you mostly use this one for Kazarkin delivery and move blocking again. Another one that is becoming a little bit more common is Ogryn. Ogryn are also fairly cheap. Currently, they are only 10 points more than a unit of Catachan. So 65 points plus the 70 is 135 points. It has a huge volume of fire, and the Ripper guns, while they are inside of the vehicle, gain lethal hits against vehicles and monsters because of the Born Soldiers rule and the way that Firing Deck interacts with it. It's not the Ogryn who are shooting the guns, it's the Chimera. Some of the downsides is that it's low OC, and Ogryn are jack of all trades. So just like the Chimera, the Ogryn don't really have this dedicated job to do. They're okay at melee, they're decent at shooting, they just have a really high volume of heavy bolter shots effectively, and they don't really have a lot of OC. They're just kind of these fat idiots that you can put wherever you need. They're cheap, you can use them to score secondaries, you can do whatever, but it is decent supporting damage, especially if you're able to get all of it in close range. After that, it's pretty flexible, because both the Chimera and the Ogryn just kind of do whatever you need them to. They're cheap, you don't care that much if they die, and, you know, it's decent damage. The last one that you see sometimes is Bolgryn. It's an incredibly durable, fast delivery of one of our melee units. However, one of the biggest downsides here is you are limited to putting 3 Bolgryn inside a Chimera instead of taking units of 6. And I am a massive fan of taking units of 6 Bolgryn simply because of how exceedingly durable they are. I will oftentimes say every subsequent Bolgryn is more valuable than the one you took before it, because there is a critical mass where you can bring them and a lot of people just cannot deal with them. In general, you use this for space control and move blocking, and the Bolgryn are also very good at just standing in places and doing sabotage, because a lot of people cannot kill them. You can consider putting other types of infantry inside a Chimera other than Catachan. Like, I have seen people do infantry squads or Cadians. Not a huge fan of this in terms of competitive play, but in your casual games and your narrative games, like, it's not that much worse than Catachan. It's just not as effective because it's mostly more expensive and you don't have Scout. But it's okay. You can also consider putting solo characters in Chimeras just to fill them. For instance, Strachan can make use of the order. He can give an order in the command phase, and then you can move and you can disembark him, and you can use that to order switch, and basically give a unit both move, 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 and then switch them over to fixed bayonets or take aim or first rank fire, second rank fire, so you can get a very mobile, very aggressive unit this way. But there's probably a better use of your 125 points. But if you do choose to go down this route, it is available to you. It's not terrible, but usually Catachan are probably a better use of that. Let's get through the orders and stratagems. You don't give Chimeras orders all that often. In general, I would say over a game where I'm playing like 4 Chimeras, I'll give maybe 2 Chimera orders per game. But the most important one you can generally give to a Chimera is move, move, move. This is especially useful if you're trying to use Kazarkin or Ogryn to get them close up to your opponents, get them within that rapid fire range, and do the maximum damage. It's also a way for you to get Melt-a-Minds in range. It's also just really useful. Moving an extra 3 inches allows you to score secondaries, get 2 objectives, and make charges with both the Chimera and whatever's inside easier. Remember though, you cannot charge if you disembark after the Chimera moved. If you do really need some excess damage, you don't have a better target to take aim to, you can give it to a Chimera. It's most useful if you have Ogren embarked, since the Ripper guns will benefit from the order as well, but you're mostly just relying on the volume of shots to get anything done, because most of it is strength 3, 4, and 5, meaning that you're really relying on actually getting that part through. Other ones you will sometimes see, Duty and Honor. I put this in every video. It's not useful until it is, but it's also very useful when it's useful, because you're going to flip an objective. And remember, you score after giving orders, and your opponent scores after inspired command, which happens during the command phase. First rank fire, second rank fire is surprisingly useful on Chimeras, simply because the lasgun array is rapid fire, the heavy stubber is rapid fire, and if you have Ogren, the Ripper guns are rapid fire, and if you have Kazarkin, the plasma guns are rapid fire. So if you're going to be shooting at something that you can get an extra shot, and you really are relying on wounding on 5s or 6s, getting a couple of extra shots with lethal hits, in general, actually does more damage this way than if you give it take aim. Okay, take cover does literally nothing. Don't do it. Fixed bayonets, you better be doing it because it's funny, because it also does basically nothing. Not literally nothing though, just basically nothing. Stratagems. The most important one that you're going to be doing with Chimeras, and you can consistently do this like once a turn in a lot of games, is Tank Shock. Because a Chimera is toughness 9, you're going to be averaging 3 mortal wounds to a target, so it's basically another instance of grenades. If you combine with grenades from people inside, you can do an average of 6 mortal wounds to a target, and it's something that has an invulnerable save that is really good. Overwatch is okay if you have a double heavy flamer Chimera. It's a budget hellhound, so you can kill chaff with it. But it's important to remember that firing deck does not apply. So if you have Catachan inside, firing deck does not apply outside of your own shooting phase, meaning that the Chimera cannot fire the Catachan's flamer. Smokescreen will come up sometimes. -1 to hit, benefit of cover, not bad. If you really need one to stay alive, you can do it. Armored Might is generally pretty expensive, but imagine somebody pops out and they're going to be shooting a bunch of damage 2 shots at you. You can be like, well, I could die in 6 shots, or I could make you kill me in 11 wounds that actually get through my armor. So, you know, it's okay. Usually not worth it into Melta, very rarely worth it into things like las cannons, but it can keep you alive into the right profiles. Okay, one of the main things that any army that takes transports needs to think about is you can use your transports as activation gates. What I mean by this is you cannot kill the transport and what is inside it in the same activation. This is really useful against armies that only are active in one phase for their damage, like Orcs, World Eaters, or Tau. Other armies, like Space Marines, can shoot the transport and then charge what's inside. But armies that are only active in one phase are really going to struggle. A couple of quick tricks here. So firstly, if you're going to be moving your Chimera, you need to be thinking about where the guys are going to get out if the transport actually dies. So what you'll oftentimes do is move the Chimera into positions where the payload can safely disembark out of line of sight by putting the Chimera right up against the wall, and then as soon as the Chimera dies, everyone inside gets onto the other side of the wall where they're no longer in line of sight. Additionally, you can use this to take objectives. If your opponent kills a Chimera, remember that you can move an extra 3 inches forward effectively. This will not control the objective in your opponent's turn because you are battle shocked when you are getting out of a destroyed transport. However, it will allow you to control it on your own turn because you become unbattle shocked unless you take too much damage. Next, nuisance charging. Because Chimeras are so cheap and they mostly rely on lethal hits anyway, so you don't really care if you're hitting on 4s or 5s, Chimeras are some of the best nuisance chargers in the game. In general, if you have an option to charge a Chimera into something and you are not going to die on the swingback, you should usually do it, because our thing matters less than their thing. This is really good to move block your opponents by getting extra movement. You can tie up chaff, and you can give your opponents vehicles and monsters -1 to hit. It's also really useful to deny overwatches. So let's say that there's a Land Raider Redeemer or something else that has a really nasty overwatch. You can charge it with a Chimera first. They don't want to shoot flamers into the Chimera because you're not going to be doing a lot of damage. And then you can charge the infantry in, because once it is in combat, it cannot overwatch the infantry. Okay, one of the things I oftentimes hear about Kazarkin in Chimeras is that they can't give themselves an order. And that's true. However, disembarking, you can get 3 inches outside of the Chimera, so you're basically getting a bonus 3 inches of movement, which is the same as move, move, move. A lot of armies will use Chimeras and other transports to extend the threat ranges of charges and to serve as a pseudo-order for the guys inside. If you've ever played against Chaos Space Marines and see a bunch of Legionnaires or Chosen popping out of a Rhino, this is the exact same principle. However, it's important to remember that the disembark is not just plus 3-inch movement. You actually have to set them up. What I mean by this is, if you have a Chimera an inch back from the wall, some guys, especially on 25mm bases, might be able to get to the other side of the wall. However, you cannot physically set them up inside the wall. So I would really strongly recommend that everybody takes their guys, and you actually go to set them up, and then you can move them afterward. Another important part of this is you can disembark, move the transport, and then move the guys. So if you want to have the guys hiding where the Chimera just was hiding, this is a way to move the Chimera and disembark the guys to the place that they want to go. Another really niche interaction in the rules is the fallback and embark. This is most useful with a unit like Ogren, who might actually survive a round of fighting. If you fall back, you can then embark into a transport. And even though the model is not eligible to shoot, it is not the model shooting anymore. Instead, it is the transport who's shooting with firing deck. The only restrictions on firing deck on things that you cannot shoot with firing deck are, one, things that are one-shot weapons, or models that have already shot this phase. But you didn't shoot this phase. You're not eligible to shoot, but you didn't shoot this phase. So your Ogren can now shoot out the firing deck after falling back into the Chimera. Here's some other cool tricks that you can do with Chimeras. So the first thing, everybody knows that strategic reserves on turn 2 cannot go into your opponent's deployment zone. However, we do have a trick to get around this. If you take a Chimera from strategic reserves and you put it in no man's land right on the line with your opponent's deployment zone, you can disembark models from the Chimera into your opponent's deployment zone. They still need to be 9 inches away from all enemy models. However, it's very clearly said that units that are disembarking from a transport are not strategic reserves. This is really useful for turn 2 behind enemy lines, establish locus, or engage on all fronts. Here's another really cheeky one. This is really useful for armies like orcs, and I actually learned this from an orc player originally. And I'm going to read the rule first before I actually talk about the practical application of it. Units embarked within a reserves model can disembark in the turn that model is set up. This does not specify that it has to be our turn. The second important part of this is a transport arriving from strategic reserves must be set up wholly within 6 inches of a battlefield. Does this also apply to units that disembark from that transport in the same turn? And the answer is no. Such units disembark normally, provided they are set up more than 9 inches horizontally away from all enemy units. This is really important. So the practical application of this is you bring a Chimera from strategic reserves in no man's land 6 inches off of the board edge, and then you disembark the models inside an additional 3 inches. This means that the models that started inside the transport can be 9 inches into the battlefield. There are a lot of examples in the deployment zones and the battlefields that are set up where the center of an objective marker is 10 inches from the battlefield edge. Models that come in from strategic reserves cannot get to these objectives. The edge of the objective is more than 6 inches from the side of the battlefield. However, these same objectives are not more than 9 inches away from the edge of the battlefield, and this can allow you to put units onto an objective during your opponent's turn so that you can score them on your turn. Remember, you have to still end this 9 inches away from all enemy units. But if they put sticky on an objective, if they're far away from the objective, it's a way to take away a lot of these objectives, and you can take away your opponent's home sticky in almost every mission. Next, in general, you want to be trying to deploy your Chimeras such that they can score secondaries on turn 1. Because Chimeras are so cheap and they're kind of throwaway units, you want to make sure that you can put them in places where they can score turn 1 secondaries like area denial, where you need to be within 3 inches of the center, and you're going to sacrifice a unit to do so in most games. Containment, where you need to be within 9 inches of a board edge and not within your deployment zone. You're also likely going to sacrifice units to do this. Sabotage, cleanse, engage on all fronts, extend battle lines, establish locus, and secure no man's land. Make sure that they can move into a place where they can score these objectives. Even though things like Chimeras are going to be probably removed, they can't be trivially removed. You can't shoot at them with a couple of las guns and expect them to die. So, it is a reasonable way to force your opponent to overcommit to dealing with something. Also, more Chimeras is generally better. If you only have a single Chimera, it is just removed fairly trivially, and then it just becomes a way to move your models a little bit faster. However, the more of them you have, the easier it is to block off entire sections of the board. One Chimera is pretty easy to remove, but 4 Chimeras is a lot harder to remove simply because of the number of bodies that they have to chew through. 6 Chimeras is even harder for them to actually do. However, the downside of bringing all of these Chimeras is because they are both vehicles, they can't move through each other. So you need to be very cognizant of how you're actually deploying them and making sure that you can move them into places that you want. So if you string them along, front to front or front to back, you can move them potentially really far. Just be careful with getting caught in traffic jams. The reverse of that, though, is you can make traffic jams for your opponents by having multiple of them ready to go. Lastly, Chimeras are part of a combined arms strategy. You need more damage than anything a Chimera or their contents can provide you over the course of the game. They are really good, like we said, at gumming up the midboard, at making your opponent take forever to get to your back lines, but they rely on other parts of the army to actually do the damage. You can combine this with units like Hellhounds and Exterminators to improve the damage output of Chimeras, because AP1 lethal hits and AP2 lethal hits are way more scary than AP0 lethal hit. The other major thing to think about is if you're going to be moving a Chimera into a position where it's very likely to die, make sure that if your opponent wants to kill it, they have to move into a position where they are going to get shot back. Don't let your opponents shoot from places where your Rogaldorans and your Lehman Russes can't get to them on the next turn. Force your opponent to trade evenly in units, and by bringing a bunch of Chimeras, we should have more units than they do. A lot of this has been a little bit more technical than I initially realized it might be. However, I still hope that it was useful to some of you, and I know even very strong players haven't known about all the tips and tricks I was bringing up in this video. I want to give a quick shout out to the people who contributed the most to this: Nick Jagiello from Canada, Scott Cairns, and David Purcell from the United States. I'm working on a video right now where we talk about the default deployment coming out from the Guard. I'll talk a little bit about how you can use Chimeras in a lot of these styles of games. For now, though, this has been the Officer Training School episode on the Chimera. My name has been Joshua Joshi Howard, and we'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.